Hey, what is up, everybody? I am here to give you a review of the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast with his guest, none other than Paul Heyman. And it happened on June 1st. I didn't get to see it after War, and I didn't get to see it because I was at my friend's house, and I just got home today, so I'm giving you the review now. I was really hyped for this. They really hyped me for it because these are two guys that have the mind for the business, and it's nice to see them sit and interact. And I knew this wasn't going to be one of those scripted podcasts that we've been seeing lately. Stone Cold likes to just shoot the shit, and then he knows how a podcast is actually run. So I'm happy about that. And I'm really hyped. I'm glad I sat down and watched this. It was really enjoyable to sit down and watch. And I'm going to talk about it. You know, when I sit down and just watch these two talk, it's really awesome. I feel like these two guys know each other very well. They have that chemistry, so I think it's just really awesome stuff. I like sitting down and watching these two interact with each other. Alright, so I'm going to try to cover everything in order as I can. And if you haven't seen this yet, I suggest you go watch it now and then come back and watch it, and then come back and watch this review so that way you don't complain that you got spoiled. Alright, so the podcast started, you know, they talked about how they met, and they talked about how it was back in WCW, which is world class, which stood for world class. I always screw it up. It's World Championship Wrestling. I don't know why I keep screwing it up. It stood for World Championship Wrestling. And Stone Cold Steve Austin was there. He had his blonde hair. This was a young version of Stone Cold Steve Austin. And he saw him backstage. And at the time, they called Paul Heyman Paul E. Dangerously. Or Paul E. Dangerous was one of those two. And he was backstage with Jim Ross. And he looked at him. I didn't get to talk to him because Stone Cold was gone, but then when they finally talked to him, but back then Stone Cold was called Stunning Steve Austin back then. And he had him run the ropes, and he ran the ropes so roughly, like he's never seen anybody run the ropes like that. Paul Heyman actually thought that he was going to break the ropes and go right through them. And they just met, and they were going to make the Dangerously Alliance. It was going to be like WCW's ripoff of the Four Horsemen. They were going to have Rick Rude, Arn Anderson, I'm trying to think who else. They were going to have Bobby the Brain Heenan, and I'm trying to remember the other guy's name. He got inducted into the Hall of Fame this year. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember what his name was. Let me look it up, because I remember off the top of my head. So let me just look it up real quick. Of course, my phone's glitching out. I don't remember off the top of my head, so I'm just going off. So I'm just going to look it up real quick. Hold on. It takes some time because my phone glitches out. WWE. They were also going to have Medusa in it, which is who also went to the Hall of Fame. Okay, hold on. I have it. So now it's going under the lawn thin. Hold on one second. I'm just looking it up real quick. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I know his face and stuff, but I don't remember his name. It's loading. I think it's right here. come on. My phone's like glitching out right now. But Stone Cold. I'm just gonna. It's gonna bug me if I don't look it up now. Hold on 1 second. I'm just looking it up real quick. Hold on. I see him right there too. Alright, hold on. Just my phone just fucking froze, of course. Okay, hold on. His name was... Larry Zbyszko, there it is. But yeah, Larry Zbyszko was going to be in that group. And yeah, Medusa, who's known as Alundra Blaze. And they wanted to add a 5th guy in that group. And I don't remember who it was going to be off the top of my head. And Paul Heyman suggested just to put Stone Cold Steve Austin in there. And he suggested it to the guy that was running the WCW at the time, Dusty Rhodes. And he does an awesome Paul Heyman does an awesome Dusty Rhodes impression, by the way. And he said Dusty Rhodes wasn't too sure at first, and then Paul Heyman talked him into it by saying that this guy could be the next big thing, he could be the next big superstar, just like you will. He's from Texas. And then Dusty Rhodes warmed up to it and took credit for the idea, which was pretty awesome. And they became managers together. And this whole group was going to happen too, because Paul Heyman was going to Paul Heyman had gotten suspended from, I forget why, from WCW, and he was going to file a lawsuit against him, but I guess they gave him this group, so it didn't happen. But I thought that was awesome stuff. And then they went on to ECW. He became Stone Cold Steve Austin's, he helped Stone Cold Steve Austin cut a promo, and I thought that was pretty awesome stuff. And then they talked a little bit about Brock Lesnar, and he asked what he's doing right now, and we find out that Brock Lesnar we know he owns a farm, and he does hunting, and he talks about how he owns farms like in the United States and Canada, and he says no matter what Brock Lesnar does, no matter how rich he gets from his WWE matches, from his UFC fights, he is going to always be a farmer. He always is going to buy more money to become a farmer because he wants to own every farm in the world, pretty much. And Stone Cold asks him if Brock Lesnar was considering going back to the UFC when his WWE contract was up. And Brock Lesnar was thinking about it. In January, he opened his own little training camp to train for the fights. And in Brock Lesnar's mind, well, he wasn't thinking about who his first opponent was going to be. He was thinking about how that he was going to beat this guy. He was going to pretty much fuck him up. And Brock Lesnar, but Brock Lesnar wasn't really sure about it, because the reasons he wanted to go back is because he felt like that when he had diverticulitis, or whatever it's called, diverticulitis, I forget exactly what it's called. He had that, by the way, his whole life. But he was such a beast, he didn't know about it. And he talked about how, he was going to go back because he felt like that he finally didn't have it anymore, because he won the UFC championship in his 4th fight when he did have it. And then he wants to see, now that he's healthy, what he could accomplish in the UFC. And Paul Heyman said, so that was the reason he wanted to go back. But Paul Heyman said that Brock Lesnar does like the business, and Stone Cold even said he referred to the IWC, which is the Internet Wrestling Community, which is what I am, which is what everybody that has a wrestling website or makes YouTube videos like me says that Brock Lesnar actually doesn't have the passion for this business because he doesn't travel all the time. He doesn't seem like he cares. But he says that he does care about the business, but he realizes that his kids need him more than the WWE does. So he wants to be there for his kids all the time. And, you know, that's pretty much how they put it. And the reasons why he wanted to stay is because he was liking his push that he got from 2014, you know, when he won the title and all that. And he loved that one, and he wanted to continue that one going into 2015. So he was at that crossroads. And he feels like that he made the right decision staying with the WWE. And then he asks him about... And they made jokes, too, talking about how Stone Cold Steve Austin wanted to get together with Brock Lesnar and do some hunting stuff, which I think was pretty cool. And then he asked him about CM... No, he didn't ask him about that. I'm going to get back to that, though. And then Stone Cold asked him about, why he... everybody wants to see Paul Heyman. They don't just want to see Brock Lesnar. They want to see Paul Heyman, because they were talking about too how Brock Lesnar's that part-timer, and you know, he compares Brock Lesnar's appearances to Christmas. You always look forward to that one day a year of Christmas, and you finally get it. And that's what he compares Brock Lesnar to, is he's like Christmas. When he finally shows up, everybody tunes in, and his match is really important. That's what he talks about. But he talked about how Paul Heyman doesn't show up with other clients. He doesn't have any new clients like Brock Lesnar, because they have that relationship in real life. Because Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman actually are real life friends, and Paul Heyman is Brock Lesnar's advocate. And he feels like that they have that close relationship, and it wouldn't really work with anybody else. And I actually agree with that, because when they tried it when Paul Heyman was with other people in the WWE, it didn't feel right. Like when he was with Curtis Axel and Cesaro, was just kind of I don't see that connection. But Brock Lesnar has that connection, so I actually agree with that. And they talked about how the only other wrestler that it really worked was with CM Punk, because he talked about how he played two different characters when he was with those guys. He played a different character when he was with Punk than he was with Lesnar, and I actually agree with that. He was like the cheerleader for CM Punk, you know, the one always cheering for him in his matches, because CM Punk could carry the ball by himself, carry the mic, and he was Brock Lesnar's advocate. And I actually, you do notice the difference if you think about it. And he talked about his relationship with CM Punk, if they still talk. And Paul Heyman says that they talk, they text every day. And Paul Heyman says that CM Punk, they talk about CM Punk's UFC fight, and Stone Cold asked how about CM Punk's UFC career, and Paul Heyman said that the UFC, CM Punk said he wanted to do this for a while. He liked the UFC ever since he was a kid, and he wished that he had done this 5 years earlier. And he said that he actually kind of sells CM Punk's UFC fight in a way, talking about how CM Punk could just go in there, shock everybody, and beat the crap out of his opponent, or he could just get in there and just get pummeled himself. And he says that CM Punk isn't afraid of that. So he really did a good job selling CM Punk's UFC fight when CM Punk does make his UFC fight. And I am going to try to start watching UFC. I'm going to be posting some UFC videos maybe on my other channel. I'm going to try to start watching some fights there and stuff like that. And that's all fine and good. And I will try to get the CM Punk UFC fight video up. I think that's all going to be cool. Alright, what else did they talk about after this? Because I'm trying to remember. Because then they kind of... I was paying attention still, but this is when But I'm trying to think. What did they talk about after this? Promos. No, not promos. They talked about moves. How people don't sell many moves. Because they talk about Jake the Snake Roberts' finisher, the DDT. When somebody hit that finisher on you, you were done. You were out. And very few people kicked out of Jake the Snake Roberts' DDT. And Stone Cold feels that everyone just does a DDT now. Not many people are selling the moves, you know. And Paul Heyman, the way he says it, is it's the wrestler that sells the move. So he puts a perfect analogy. If Mark Henry decided to use a headlock and everybody just started tapping out, and Mark Henry just kept using that headlock for a certain period of time, a long period at a time too, and then finally at like a big pay-per-view event, somebody breaks out of that headlock, it's going to be something special. And I actually like that analogy. It's the wrestler that makes the move devastating. And they talked about that for a little bit, and I actually kind of agree with that, you know. I can agree with what Stone Cold's saying too, because not enough people sell these moves. And I can agree with that. And he gets into that a little bit later on. So then then they talk about promos and how not enough people, like he says that the promo work is fine in the WWE, but they think that they could be better. And Paul Heyman talks about promos, how he learned how to cut a promo as an old WCW event, and he had to go on he had to go on last, and he only had 4 minutes, and he pretty much talked and did whatever he could to get himself over. But he talked about how it still wasn't good. Dusty Rhodes told him that he didn't sell anybody, because in those promos it's about money. You have to sell people what you have to try to sell someone what you're trying to sell, if that makes sense. That's what Paul Heyman tries to do in his promos. If he's talking about his client that he's feuding with, if he's talking about something special that happens, he tries to sell that the best that he can. Even Stone Cold even mentioned that you have to have that right tone of voice, you have to have the right reasons to cut this promo, you know, the emotion and stuff like that. And I think that, and I don't remember everything he said, but, you know, I think that I agree with everything that he said. And Paul Heyman mentioned what's lacking nowadays in today's promos is I'll see somebody and someone will say last week on SmackDown, and he's like, well, last week at this event, he's like, well, I think you should stop right there. You know, when he comes out, when he says, my name is Paul Heyman and I am the client and the advocate for the WWE World Heavyweight Champion, and he talks about, like, you know, he's saying who he is, what his purpose is, and what he's trying to sell. So that's what he says is missing in promos nowadays, and I completely agree with that. I think that's what people, even though we get annoyed, my friend talks how we get annoyed that he says that. Gives Paul Heyman's promos purpose, and I really enjoyed that he said that. And then what else did he talk about? So yeah, they talked about promos for a while. They talked about how what happened. Oh, they talked about Vincent J. McMahon, Vincent James McMahon, Vince McMahon's father. And they talked about how Paul Heyman, how they met. And they said that it kind of cuts on the Xbox a little bit, so I didn't get to see what they were saying. But they say that Paul Heyman was a photographer. And he was told to go down in the bad part of New York City and take a picture with him, with Vincent J. McMahon and Andre the Giant. And that picture was done really well. He got paid $50 for it. Then he went back and he was going to give a copy to Vincent J. McMahon. And the cops pulled him aside. But then Howard Finkel came up and said that this is really good. Start doing this. And then he gave him $50 each month. But he never got the money from Vincent J. McMahon. He always get it from somebody else, like Gorilla Monsoon or, you know, other people. So I thought that was interesting. And Paul Heyman was like 14 or 15 when this was happening too. And he had like the old cameras. He talked about that for a little bit. I thought that was kind of cool. And then they talked about what's been happening with the relationship between him and Vincent Kennedy McMahon. throughout the years, and they said that they've always had a solid relationship. It's definitely been better. I think they say the reason that it's better is because they don't see each other that often. He's not criticizing Vince and Kennedy McMahon about the shows and all that. And I think he said him being a father definitely changed his perspective on the business, because he was always worried, he was always petrified about each and little thing. And he talked about, too, a little bit how people used to think that he did drugs and stuff like that. And he said that he was afraid to do a line of cocaine because his heart would like explode. And he always he said that somebody famous when he was young died of that, and he was afraid that his father, who was Jewish, because they're Jewish, Paul Heyman's family, you can kind of tell if you think about it. But standing over his grave is like, this is what you threw a life away on, is this. So he was afraid of that, and I like that he brought that up. And Vince McMahon, but Paul Heyman talked about how they have that relationship. He's not criticizing Vince McMahon on some things in the show, and they talk about how Paul Heyman was fired when we didn't see him for a while, how he left in 2006 because he was writing SmackDown for a while, and when he would constantly tell Michael Cole and Taz, who were doing commentary at the time, to say that SmackDown Raw was the B show, which I thought was really cool. And then they revamped ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, and that used to be Paul Heyman's creation, which I talked about. And they had creative differences of what they wanted to do with it. Paul Heyman was very defensive of it. He didn't want Vince McMahon to ruin ECW. So he just wanted, you know what, if we're going to have differences about it, why don't you bring somebody else in to do this, and I'll go on to write back to become the head writer of SmackDown. But Vince McMahon didn't agree, and they were on the plane one day, and Paul Heyman even said that he was kind of starting to lose his passion for the business. He said it was time for him to go, so that's kind of what happened. And then eventually they, 5 to 6 years down the line, they learned the lessons, and now they're close again. So I like that they brought that up. And then they talked about some stories on the road. And they talked about how Stone Cold Steve Austin and Rick Rude got into it. And they said that Stone Cold was talking about something, and he was using God's name in vain. And Rick Rude got upset about it, but so they apologized, and Stone Cold did it again. So they beat the crap out of each other, and I liked that story. The next story, though, is really funny. Apparently Stin and the Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott Steiner, were all in the car, and they were putting wrestling on hold on each other as Stin was driving. And then they saw Paul Heyman and the Samoans. They were a tag team, which had consisted of Samu, which is Alpha's son, and Rikishi, who was called Junior at the time. And they threw food at Paul Heyman and the Samoans, and they just threw like watermelons and stuff. So then eventually, while they were all driving on the highway, and Paul Heyman, so then they stopped, and the Samoans grabbed any like food, anything that they could grab at not a concession, at the store, I'm just gonna call it, and they drove, and then this got into a food fight. They called it a road war, and they were just throwing stuff at each other, bottles and stuff like that. And then they went back to give the car back, because this was a rental car from North Carolina, and they pretty much didn't accept it, and they left that car out, and they wrote on the windshield, "Never loan a car to Paul E. Dangerously." They were still calling him that. From WCW ever again. Until this day, Paul Heyman cannot rent a car from North Carolina, which I think is really funny. I really liked that story. That's a story worth listening to. Then they closed off. But then Paul Heyman asked Stone Cold Steve Austin a couple of questions, which I like that he did that. I don't think anybody else has done that. Well, that I've seen before. And he asked him 2 hard questions. He asked him how he felt about John Cena doing the springboard stunner. off, that he does. And Stone Cold says that he doesn't mind the move. He thinks he does the move very well, but he doesn't sell the move that well. No one gets pinned off that move. And he says, too, that it's a kind of a risky move because they oil the ring and somebody could slip and stuff like that. But he doesn't mind the move, and he says that he does like John Cena. He's a big John Cena supporter. He respects his work ethic to the business and stuff like that. And then Paul Heyman asks if they want to do the match Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 32, which I really would like to see that match. That's a match definitely in the long time in the making. I think it would be nice if Stone Cold could get back in the win one more time. And Stone Cold says that he beat Brock Lesnar's ass. He likes somebody beat his ass. And Paul Heyman said that this would work out really well. This is in your hometown. It's the Rattlesnake versus the Beast. It's a match that was supposed to happen in 2002 when you walked out. Well, he doesn't say that, but that's kind of what he said. But then Stone Cold gets intense and says that I would beat his ass, and then we have to have 3 Finns. It would have to be a Texas death match, because I would expect his in-win ability, but I'd have to be a Texas death match. That's the match he would want. And then Stone Cold gets intense. He gets intense. And he says, too, that I'm a funny guy. I like to make comments. But if you poke at me, I will beat your ass. And he threatens to do that to Paul Heyman. And Paul Heyman turns his phone on. He's about to text Brock Lesnar about it. But, and then his phone keeps texting. And one of the WWE writers said, you should just fire all the writers and you take over, which I thought was really funny, which really should happen. And then they ended the show. And I thought I thought this was an awesome podcast. I don't think it's the best. It's definitely it's not the best. It's one of my favorites that he's done on the network. I think it was really good. It was a nice sit down to listen to. I like watching wrestling podcasts. I want to start watching more of them. And I've kind of done that. I want to start doing that. And I really wish they would put this on the network. But then again, I think Stone Cold has to rush, because you can tell he tries to fit everything in there, and they do a good job of that. I really like Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast. I think he asks the tough questions. I noticed, too, he'll talk to you for a little bit, and then he'll just shoot you right with the questions, That's what he says, too. They just shoot the shit, And I really like this podcast. It didn't feel like scripted or anything. It felt like they were actually shooting from the shit, so I liked this podcast. It was really good. If you have the WWE Network, I definitely suggest you get it. You sit down and watch this podcast, and you can leave your thoughts and comments about what you think about it down below. Now, I want to tell you now that if you're going to be pissed at me that I spoiled the podcast, it's your own fault, because I did warn you to get off before I talked about it. So don't blame me. Blame yourselves. I did tell you to click off the video and then come back and watch it after you've watched it. So I don't want to see any comments complaining that you spoiled it, because I warned you to get off the video. So I don't want to see that. You shouldn't even, if you didn't see this, you shouldn't even be visiting YouTube sites anyways. I didn't do that myself. I'm a couple days late, so I didn't do that myself. But that's pretty much it, guys. You can click down in the right-hand corner to subscribe, and I'll be back throughout some point in the week to give you a video. So that's pretty much it, guys.